if you're looking at the schedule that I passed out at the beginning of the thing, is Lesson 5. We took 2 weeks on Lesson 4. And this Lesson 5 deals with the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. Obviously, there's overlap with the Greek period, because what we're transitioning from is the Greek domination of Judah, Palestine, to a period of independence. And then that independence is going to evaporate as the Roman period comes into view. And of course, that's where we're at when the New Testament begins. And so we're rapidly bringing this this study to a close. I've always been amazed that I could get through 400 years of history in 8 weeks. But hey, I did the Book of Job a couple of times in this quarter, and then that's just almost impossible, you know. But anyway, but before we go any further, Mark is going to lead us in a word of prayer.
So grateful that we can come together and assemble and have these classes, these periods of Bible study. We're thankful for Tom and for all the brothers that put forth the effort and the study to teach these classes and bring this material to us. Thankful for the Bible, Father. We're so grateful you've given us your word, and you have given us some ways that we can understand it. And we're grateful for that. And we pray for Brother Harrison at this time, that you will be with him, and that this material be presented in a way that we can all understand it. Help us to learn ways, Father, to apply the things in these classes to our daily lives so that we can be better servants in thy kingdom. Again, we're thankful for all your blessings, Father. We're mindful of those members of our various congregations that may be sick and experiencing health issues. We pray for each and every one that you would, if it be thy will, you would allow them to gain a better portion of health. Again, we're thankful that we're able to be here. Thankful for your love and your mercy. Thankful above all for Jesus and his death on the cross for our sins. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. So, as we said, this overlaps both the Greek and the Roman periods. But this study, what we're going to learn about is the revolt by the Jews it's going to be led by a group that we know as the Maccabees, and then with the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty. When we were wrapping up last week, we talked about Antiochus IV. He had been taken by the Romans, who in essence had already brought the Seleucids of Syria into captivity, or not into captivity, but into subjection. In other words, Rome already had the power over them. And one of the things that I don't know if we talked about it last week or not, but Antiochus the third, who Rome had taken his son, Antiochus IV, to Rome. He was a captive there. He would get educated while he was in Rome. And all of this occurred on the occasion of Antiochus III making efforts to attack and take control of Greece. And so the Romans did not want that, and so they send him back to Syria and take his son sort of as an insurance, if you will. He was also required to pay a substantial amount of money to Rome. In 169 BC, at this point now, Antiochus IV is ruling in his father's place. And Antiochus IV is the bad guy. We talked about that somewhat last week. His name, the Antiochus Epiphanes, the Jews sort of changed that, and Jim, again, the expression Antiochus Epiphanes, which means the wicked one. And so, and he was. Now, I want to share with you something that is very important as we lead up to the revolt by the Maccabees. In 168 BC, Antiochus was actually having a successful campaign against the Ptolemies of Egypt, and about to take the city of Alexandria. And a large Roman fleet arrives. And the Roman, I always thought it was a general, and I've always described what happened was with a general. But I did read something today, and I'm going to read to you what I read. This is it's what I'm convinced that leads to all the bad stuff that happened to the Jews under this Antiochus IV. In 168 BC, I took a screenshot of it. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes had nearly conquered Egypt and was preparing to take Alexandria. The Roman Senate, wanting to keep Egypt in their sphere of influence without committing an army, sent the ambassador and former consul Gaius Popilius Linus. And this is what unfolds. When Popilius met Antiochus, he didn't shake his hand. Instead, he handed the king a tablet containing the Senate, the Roman Senate, harsh demands for an immediate retreat. When Antiochus asked for time to consult with his council, Popilius used his walking stick. I always thought it was a general that used a sword, but this is as that he used a walking stick to draw a circle around Antiochus in the sand. And then he demanded that Antiochus give him a firm answer for the Senate before stepping out of that circle, implying that Rome would declare war if he refused. It says the king hesitated for a moment, but terrified of Rome's military might, agreed to withdraw all of his forces from Egypt. Now, the way I heard it first time and how I've always presented it was that there's this general who says, no, we would rather you not attack the Ptolemies. And Antiochus said, okay, well, I'll think about it. And so the general takes his sword out and draws a circle in the sand around and says, take all the time you need. Just give me an answer before you step outside that circle. I'm sure that's a little bit of embellishment. And what I've read is probably more accurate. But the result's the same. The result's the same because Antiochus goes back home a whipped puppy. And being the horrible and the ferocious person that he was, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to take his frustrations out on somebody, isn't he? Who do you think he's going to take it out on? He's going to take it out on the Jews. Now, the Jews were, during the reign of his father, Antiochus III, he had promised the Jews freedom to practice their own religion. And they actually liked that because they had had somewhat of a difficult time under the reign of the Ptolemies of Egypt. And so Antiochus breaks his father's word. So he begins this really hostile movement of Hellenization. We talked about that Hellenizing last week. That's the of forcing Greek culture, or Hellenization was, the practice of Greek culture. And so he's actually forcing it upon the Jews. He kills thousands of Jews. He destroys the walls of Jerusalem. He strips the temple. And he carries 10,000 Jews away as slaves. Now, one writer I have here, a book in New Testament history, this is F.F. Bruce, who's, if you ever have an opportunity to get a good book on New Testament history, I would recommend that. And he says this Greek god in Syria was known as Baal Shaman. And he says that Daniel has a wordplay in Hebrew that describes this, and he translates this into English as an abomination of desolation, an appalling sacrilege. And in essence, that's exactly what it was. Now, there were some Jewish priests who, we talked about some of them, who they wanted to embrace the Hellenization. There were others that would not. Now, we go before you further, let's point out that we still have the Samaritans. And the Samaritans are eager to protect their interest, and so they assured Antiochus IV that he has their full cooperation. And they even said that they were not Jews. And so at this time, they renamed their temple on Mount Gerizim. You remember the woman at the well talks about that with Jesus. You worship in Jerusalem, we worship on this mountain. And they named the temple of Juniper, Hellenus. And so that is another reason why by the time we get to the New Testament, when a Jew was traveling to Galilee, they crossed the Jordan and went up on the east side of the Jordan. Why? they did not want to go through Samaria. They hated the Samaritans. It's also interesting to understand that that's probably why Jesus, when he answered the question about who my neighbor is, that he gave the parable of the what? Good Samaritan. But they really, really hated one another. And so, during all of this time, we come upon an individual that, and again, I don't doubt the record. There may be some material in the books of Maccabees. We know they're not inspired. We reject the efforts to make them inspired. But there are some good historical record. They're good for a historical record. And so we read of this Mattathias of Modin. He's a priest. And he would begin this rebellion against the Seleucids of Syria, led by Antiochus IV. And the rebellion began simply by his refusal to offer a sacrifice on a pagan altar in Modin. And he kills the Jew who was going to make the sacrifice, as well as the emissary of Antiochus. And he and his 5 sons. Now, if you go back to this sheet that I gave you at the beginning of our time together, and on the back page, we have a heading, Independence under the Hasmoneans. Does everybody have this sheet? If you don't, they're up here. You can get it later, but it's up here. But if you look underneath there, you see Mattathias of Modin led a revolt that began in 167 BC. He has 5 sons: John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. Now, the word Maccabee simply means the hammer. And if you notice again on that sheet, that out by the name of Judas, he is the first one that's given that name. But it appears that this name becomes associated with all of Mattathias' sons. But Judas is called the hammer. But there is a guerrilla warfare that begins in this period of time, 167 BC, initiated by Mattathias, who refused to offer on a pagan altar, killing the priest who was about to do it, the Jew who was about to do it, and Antiochus' emissary. They destroy the altar and they head for the hills, as it were, and there are others who join him. A guerrilla warfare will follow where Mattathias, his sons and their allies, would make raids on villages, killing Seleucid leaders and also Hellenistic Jews. Judas Maccabee succeeds his father as the leader of the rebellion after his father dies. At first, Antiochus did not think that the rebellion was as widespread as it actually was. He thought that it could be easily brought to an end. So he doesn't send his full army, and he doesn't send his most important leaders. He sends inferior generals and small detachments of soldiers, and these are all defeated by the Maccabees. Against stronger generals, an army made up of Syrian and Hellenistic Jews and volunteers from neighboring countries later would be defeated by Judas and his followers. And the reason that occurs is because of the successes they had had in the beginning with the inferior leaders and small detachments of soldiers that he sent down. Eventually then, they take Jerusalem. And they remove everything pagan from the temple. And a new altar is erected and dedicated. Why would they not use the old one? It had been desecrated by the offering of a pig on the altar. Now, all of this occurred during the winter. And in particular, it occurred around the 25th of Kislev. And I don't know if I pronounced that correct or not. But that is the Jewish month that corresponds with December. As a result of this cleansing of the temple, running the Greeks out of Jerusalem, rededicating the temple, we have a new celebration, a new feast period of the Jews. It's called the Feast of Dedication. We know it today as Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights is what Hanukkah means. Have any of y'all ever heard Adam Sandler's song on Hanukkah? That's the first time I really wanted to learn more about it. You know, the first time I ever heard that, I said, I've got to learn more about that, you know. And that was a long, long time ago. That was before I ever taught my first class here. But anyway, that celebration becomes a fixture in by the New Testament period. And we read about the Feast of Dedication in John 10 and verse 22. Just so you know that it was already, by the time we get into the New Testament, it was a recognized date of celebration for the Jews. Finally, there is a defeat of the Maccabees in a battle near Jerusalem. And he begins a siege of Jerusalem, a general by the name of Lysias. And he learned of a rival that was moving against Antioch. Antioch is what? Remember, we pointed that out in one of our previous studies. What is Antioch? It is the capital, Antioch of Syria, it would become known as. It was the capital or the center of power for the Seleucid family, Antiochus and those who served under him. And so he needs to go north, and so he offers a peace deal with the Jews. And the deal involves Syria keeping out of the Jews' internal affairs. All laws against the observance of Judaism would be repealed, and the high priest would be returned to a Levite. Because you remember that they had selected certain Jews who were not even Levites to serve as the priests, because those particular Jews were willing to be Hellenized. The peace deal was accepted with some reservation by Judas, who he is also a leader and a son of Mattathias. As many of his followers, they lose a battle against the Syrians, and he dies. Judas is killed in battle. So now we have Simon, Jonathan, and Johan, or Eleazar is the another name that he's known as. Brothers of Judas, and an army of several hundred cross over Jordan to escape the Syrians. This is after there's a general agreement, but there's some opposition. Simon, Jonathan, and Johanan, and brothers of Judas, and an army regroup. And after they regroup, Jonathan becomes the next leader. And there is a great growth of the Jewish army under his leadership. Young men began to join. The Syrians were never able, after their that one victory, ever able again to successfully defeat them. And couple that again with the internal conflict that goes on in Syria. The Jews, under Jonathan's leadership, are able to secure treaties, not with Syria, but with Sparta and with Rome. That is significant, because already at this point, Rome, as we saw in 168, right now we are looking at a period of time that's around 160, 159 BC is things that we're talking about right now. And so he becomes the leader. He secures these treaties, and before the war ends, Jonathan was the high priest, and Syria had another internal conflict. And so Simon, the high priest, is an elderly man, and he makes himself allied with a man who would be King Demetrius. In return, the Jews were immune from all payments of taxes to the Syrians. Demetrius is the king of Syria. Simon allies himself, works out an agreement. They do not pay tribute to the Syrians. We've noted earlier that when armies conquer another nation, they force them to pay tribute. Here it's identified as taxes, but it's the same thing. We know that was a really bone of contention with regards to the Romans and the Jews. you recall how much the Jews loved the tax collectors, didn't they? They hated them, you know. And so this is seen by the Jews as full independence. So there's this period of time when they are not under the control of another nation. They're free to worship as they want under the law. They do not pay taxes to another nation. Now, we mentioned last week about the Hasidim, or the Hasidic party, and it recognized Onus as the legitimate heir to the Aaronic priesthood. But there's a group that comes together of the leaders in Israel, and they name Simon as leader and high priest forever, until there should arise, according to 1 Maccabees 14, 25 through 49. If you have, does any of you have available a Roman Catholic Bible? Because they will have in the middle of that what's called the Apocryphal, and that includes the writings of the Maccabees. But they make Simon the leader and the high priest forever, until there should arise a faithful prophet. And so this creates a new dynasty that would become known as the Hasmonean dynasty. And you can look on this sheet for how to spell Hasmonean instead of me spelling it for you. The name Hasmonean is believed to come from an ancestor of the Maccabees, known as Hasmoneus, or Hasmon in Hebrew. Simon, the last of the Maccabees, establishes a concept of hereditary high priesthood in the Hasmonean family. And in 434 BC, Simon and two of his sons were murdered by an ambitious son-in-law. So Simon and two of his sons were murdered by an ambitious son-in-law. A third son, John Hyrcanus, I believe his name is on here as well. Well, you just got Hyrcanus the second, because no, he is. He's listed under Simon on this sheet. He escapes. And he became the high priest and the head of the Jewish state, John Hyrcanus. During this time, there's a renewed struggle with the Syrians. But Hyrcanus reaffirms Judea's relationship with Rome. So, although they still have a period of independence, remember the treaty that they established with Rome and Sparta, and so he exercises his relationship with Rome so as to stay any attempts by Syria. He captures what we know in the New Testament as Idumea. In the Old Testament, that would be Edom. Edom, as a nation, are related, cousins to the Jews. Through whom? Esau. And he forces, this is John Hyrcanus, forces the Edomites or the Idumeans to be circumcised and to accept Judaism and practice it. He will destroy Shechem and the temple in Samaria on Mount Gerizim. And he subjugates the Samaritans. He's not very kind to them, but he brings them under his control, and he adds Galilee, the region of Galilee. He adds that to the influence of Judah. Now the picture's beginning to take, we're beginning to see, aren't we? We're beginning to understand something now about what we discover. Did you ever read about Galilee in the Old Testament? I mean, the region we refer to as Galilee? Well, obviously we know that there were tribes of Israel that were located there, but it's a region all of itself. And how did it, on the other side of Samaria, become under the influence? Somebody said, well, that's where the descendants of the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes, if there were any descendants of the 10 tribes, they were already located in Judah. They would have done that. So now, we have this Jewish leader, John Hyrcanus, beginning to issue money, the first Jewish coins under this leader. Now, after John Hyrcanus, again, my pronunciations are with my southern tongue, and I make no apologies for it. Aristobulus, the first. He is the first Hasmonean to take the title of king. You see, on this list, you see his name as the successor of John Hyrcanus in 104. And he has a very brief period of influence. No, I don't even think it was a complete year. Alexander Janus becomes the next leader in 103 BC, and he reigns until 76 BC and expanded the kingdom to the point that it nearly matched that of Solomon's. And you remember Solomon's kingdom was the one of greatest geographic reach in the Old Testament. He allies himself with a group that we can again say was influenced strongly at some point in time by the Hellenistic ideas. But they are now known as the Sadducees. So Alexander Janus allies himself with the political group, the Sadducees. Noted for what? They didn't believe in resurrection, but that's not all. They only accepted the 5 books of Moses as inspired of God. at one point during this period, because there is tremendous conflict and hatred between the Sadducees and by now, the Pharisees, who grow out of the Hasidim. Next week, I will give more information about the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but I'm just bringing this in right now. The Sadducees had 800 Pharisees crucified. But before he crucified them, this is Alexander Janus and the Pharisees, he had their children and their wives put to death. And I just, this, to me it's just always phenomenal, because these are brothers. These are all Jews. They're all descendants of Jacob. And yet, they're all practitioners of the law. But here, I want to say this, I want to be careful about I say this, but I want you to understand. We have a denominationalizing of Judaism here. In essence, it's what it is. It's just like the denominationalizing of Christianity. And don't think for a moment, you go back and you look at history and you see people professing to be Christians doing what to other Christians? Killing them. That's what happens. That's what happens when power corrupts conviction and doctrine. It's exactly what happens. And then we have Salome Alexandria. She is a widow of 2 kings. And she was you see her name, she's on this list. And she was pro-Pharisee. Josephus said, so she had indeed the name of regent, but the Pharisees had the authority. Her son, Hyrcanus II, was high priest and was supported by the Pharisees. So, again, we're understanding the bitterness. The Hasidim grew out of a conviction to be true to the law. Did not want the Greek influence in the law. But what happened to it? It was politicized, just like the Pharisees. And I have to be careful because, again, I'm very limited. But again, these are the two superpower groups of this period. There are other groups. The Qumran community, the people who wrote and scribed the materials that we refer to as the Dead Sea Scrolls. They just threw their hands up in disgust when they saw what was happening, and they decided that they were just going to go off and live by themselves. Do we have any groups that try to do that today? Huh? The Essenes, yes. Qumran community, the Essenes, yes. Well, yeah, that's a good illustration. But again, you see the lunacy of it too, don't you? That's what happens. There were other groups like that. But these two were the most powerful. And then after, you see there's a Jewish civil war. And it occurs between Hyrcanus II, who again was the son of Salome Alexandra and high priest, supported by the Pharisees. And upon the death of Salome, Hyrcanus was both high priest and a king, but a civil war starts between him and guess who? His brother. His brother is Aristobulus II. And it would last, this civil war would last until 63 BC. And guess what happens in 63 BC? The Romans. The Romans had given them freedom, but they demonstrated that they didn't know how to handle it. And the Romans were not going to have disorder. I mean, Rome was horrible. If you really want to have an eye-opener about Rome, Edward Gibbons's The Rise and the Fall of the Roman Empire is a classic work. Ariel and, was it Will Durant? I believe. It was a husband and wife team. Ariel and Will Durant wrote a multi-volume set on the history of Western civilization, and their book on Rome. It's a whole lot easier to read than Gibbons, but I recommend both. I mean, if you can grit your teeth and read a page of Gibbons and go back and read it again a couple of times before you turn the page, just so you sort of try to let it all sink in. Rome was horrendous. But there's that statement again that I want to go back to in Galatians. In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Why was it the fullness of time? Part of it, you can't dispute, you can't deny the Roman influence. Roman roads, Roman order. You know what's amazing to me about Rome? You know the scene, I believe it's in Daniel 4, when Nebuchadnezzar sort of loses his mind and he goes out and he acts like an animal. Did he lose the kingdom during that period? And at the end of that scene, you know what he does. You know what the scripture says. What did he do? He raised his eyes and looked up, and his sanity returns to him. God without a doubt, God uses nations. Rome, when they were, during a period of time after Nero dies, there's actually civil war in Rome, in the city. There's this fighting, and there'll be three, Otho, Vitellius, and there's these three men who set themselves up, but they don't last, and everything is chaotic. And you know what's going on at the same time? The siege of Jerusalem. Roman order. Rome was in chaos, but they held order in the world that they controlled. That's a phenomenal historical fact. I don't think such could happen today. But it did, and I believe there was an influence there of God. So Rome sees all this mess going on in Jerusalem, and they say, okay, we've given them, in essence, I guess you said, we've given them enough rope, they've hung themselves. Now we're going to go over there and we're going to take control of things. And that's what happens in 63 BC. the Romans had been influential in the affairs of both Egypt and Syria for decades. But it would eventually put an end to all the conflicts in the region. Egypt, Syria, Judah. They bring it all under their control. We'll end there, and next week we will start with the rise of Herod the Great, and we'll finish this up. We got 2 more class sessions, right? We'll finish this up next week. Those of you who are taking quizzes, you have your last quiz next week. You won't have another quiz after next week. So I've almost run out of patterns, so. Yes, Koine Greek. I mean, it was a common language, and it was easy. And yeah, the Greeks, the Roman roads, the Roman order, there was easy transportation. You weren't restricted because Rome ruled the world, as it were. And so, it was accessible, not with just the roads, but you weren't restricted by various governments impeding. Yeah, right there. Ooh. You didn't catch the pattern?
No. I don't try to look for patterns. I can't look for patterns.
Well, that's all right. That's, yeah, that one. That one. Yeah. I just need that. Oh, that's all right. That's good. Yeah. Me too, brother. There's sometimes I'm not even sure I could pass my own test.